Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of the Peter Huyberts podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about behavioral learning theories. Drawing heavily from Anita Woolfolk's educational psychology textbook, we'll do a little behavioral learning theories 101, talk about its place in the field of educational psychology, and how it is and can be used in today's classrooms. Also, I'll close out with how my learning about these theories has impacted my mindset on teaching and learning. Before we define behaviorism, we need to define learning, as behaviorism is a type of learning process. While there are many different ways to define it, it really comes down to the acquisition of new skills, knowledge, and behavior. There are a variety of different theories to explain how and why people learn, but today we are concerned with behavioral learning theories. As stated in educational psychology, behavioral learning theories are explanations of learning that focus on external events as the cause of changes in observable behaviors. At first glance, you might be asking what exactly that means, and I think the best way to clear that up is talking about classical conditioning and operant conditioning. With classical conditioning, an individual can learn a response or behavior from a new stimulus, an external event changing an observable behavior. Ivan Pavlov's experiments serve as the quintessential example. In summary, Pavlov was able to condition dogs to salivate after hearing a tuning fork because he began playing it before he fed them. Initially, the dogs had no response to the tuning fork, but over time, that changed as the association was made between the food and the tuning fork. Operant conditioning has its similarities to classical conditioning, but differs in that it teaches new responses and behaviors through reinforcement and punishment. Examples include a student getting candy after doing well on an exam, this being positive reinforcement, or a child not having to mow the lawn after doing well on an exam, this being negative reinforcement. Punishment similarly is presented in these two fashions. Misbehaving at home may lead to receiving more chores, or misbehaving at school could lead to not being allowed to go to recess that day. While there's plenty to discuss regarding behaviorism, now I want to transition to talking about applied behavior analysis, which is really the application of these theories, and there's a lot to consider. With applied behavior analysis, educators are really trying to figure out why these behaviors are occurring and how to change them. Functional behavior assessments are utilized to figure out the why. Educators examine what occurred before the behavior and what were the consequences that followed so they can get the ball rolling on how to make changes. From that point on, the teacher may use an A-B-A-B approach to try out a behavior intervention. They'll take data on the behavior to get a baseline, try out an intervention, stop the intervention to see what happens without it, then implement it again. Positive behavior supports are an example of these interventions, and they can be as simple as offering a student a chance to take a break, which could successfully avoid the problem behavior. So with that, we'll conclude our little behavioral learning theories crash course and move on to how it connects to educational psychology. Educational psychology and behavioral learning theories are nearly inseparable, as educational psychology studies the why, what, where, and when of how people learn, and behavioral learning theories attempt to answer these questions. Within the field, there are many critics and criticisms. Alfie Kohn is a particularly prominent critic, and he has the research to back his claims. He states that the type of reward systems and praise that can be utilized in behavioral learning theories is detrimental to students' learning. There are other criticisms as well. Punishment can be unethical, and there's a high probability for error when implementing these strategies. You have to be very careful. many things can go wrong, and if they do, you might end up reinforcing the very behaviors that you're trying to change. Now, while there are many criticisms, it still has its uses and can be effective if properly implemented. As Woolfolk explains in Educational Psychology, when actions lead to consequences that are positive for the person involved, those actions are likely to be repeated. With that being said, I think there's a few key reasons teachers need to know about these theories. One reason being that it may open your eyes to things you were already doing in the class that may draw inspiration from behaviorism. By learning more about these theories, a teacher can figure out ways to tweak what they're doing to be more effective. Also, applied behavior analysis is utilized in special education, so teachers need to be familiar with the strategies, as they will likely have special education students in their classes. When looking at implementation in the classroom, there are a multitude of ways. Token systems are one example, but at the same time, this approach has its criticisms. Encouragement in and of itself is a reinforcer that works within the behavioral learning framework, but you need to be thoughtful of what you are encouraging. It's natural to praise mastery, but encouraging progress is more important. The same can be said about praising effort. Another example is pairing non-preferred activities with preferred activities that will follow. A student who dislikes reading or some other subject may be more open to it if the understanding is that he or she gets to go to recess when they are done. These are just some examples, and there are many, many more. But now I want to talk about what I've taken away from learning about behavioral learning theories. As a special education teacher, I thought it was very important to learn more about the origins of behavioral learning theories. I work in a center program where all the students are designated special ed, and applied behavior analysis is heavily utilized. That being said, I definitely understand the criticisms of these theories, but in my setting, I've seen that they have their uses. It can really have a positive effect with students who have significant problem behaviors. All in all, I think one of my biggest takeaways is that if you're going to utilize these strategies, you have to be conscious of what you're reinforcing. You have to try your best to reinforce the learning process and not just the end result, because it's all about the journey, not just the destination. All right, that's it for now. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you guys check in